Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the show. Cameron English here with you, Director of Biosciences at the American Council on Science and Health. And I'm joined by a special guest this week, Susan Goldhaber. And we lovingly refer to her as our resident toxicologist. She's a pretty frequent contributor to our website, and she covers everything from drinking water to air to hazardous waste, toxic, in quotes, chemicals, all kinds of useful information. I highly recommend that you follow our website and follow her work. But we're talking specifically about an article you wrote just last week, actually. It's called Behind the Slap Heard Around the World. And this has to do, of course, with this drama that unfolded at the Oscars with Will Smith. But there's actually a really important science lesson in here having to do with the condition that his wife, Jada Pinkett Smith, has. So very briefly, Susan, hi, by the way, nice to talk to you.
Hi, nice to talk to you too, Cameron.
So really briefly, give us a rundown of what you're talking about in this article.
Right. Well, I'm talking about alopecia areata, which is a disease, and basically the reason I wrote about it is because it's a disease I've had since the last 16 years. So I know what people are going through with this disease. And as people watch the Will Smith thing go on, I was kind of amazed at how long people were interested in this story. I wasn't going to write originally because I thought this was going to be off the news within like a day and no one would care. But after a week, and I found that people were asking me questions. What is it? What did she have? So basically, I thought, okay, I have something to say here. Alopecia areata is an autoimmune disease, which means that your immune system attacks itself, the body. But the very weird thing about alopecia areata, the only part of the body it attacks is the hair follicles. So there's lots of other autoimmune diseases that attack, rheumatoid arthritis is one, but the hair follicles, it's just very strange. But that's basically what it is. And scientists now for a lot of years had no clue what this was caused by. The major thing they told you when you went to the dermatologist, which is what I was told, was that it was caused by stress, that if you just calmed down, your hair would come back. Because isn't that something kind of, you think of, oh my gosh, she's so stressed because she's lost all her hair. But what happened was they found out actually after the genome project was completed in 2003, they were able to find out that there were specific genes that modulated what's called immune privilege. Immune privilege means that certain parts of your body are not attacked by your immune system. Like you don't have to worry about your hair falling out or other things happening. Your immune system knows not to attack them. But in people with alopecia areata, for some reason, which scientists are just now figuring out, the immune system, it goes awry and it gets the signal that the hair follicles represent a threat. And basically it destroys them. And sometimes it can happen just little bits at a time, and sometimes your hair can grow back. Other times it can wipe everything out, including your eyelashes, eyebrows, everything, all hair, and it never grows back. So that's basically the disease.
I always find it fascinating when you go to a physician and they attribute whatever you're struggling with to stress. So, for example, I've had horrible canker sores my entire life. And anytime you go to a doctor or a dentist, they go, oh, it's probably stress-induced, so don't be so stressed out. and that kind of prescription, that was always very stressful because you're in pain and you're it's interrupting your life. And of course, mine's a very minor one. Don't get me wrong. I'm not making a comparison, but I always find that fascinating that you can mix up cause and effect with these different medical conditions. So you already mentioned the Human Genome Project. So talk a little bit about what they actually found. So did they uncover certain risk factors in DNA, and they said, oh, this probably contributes to this disease. It's not because you had a bad day.
Yeah. Well, what they found was they did there were different groups, one support groups you might call them, but there are also groups that have been funding research for 30 years. The one for alopecia is called National Alopecia Areata Foundation. There's one for rheumatoid arthritis. There's for every kind of skin disease, as you might know, has their own. But back once the Genome Project was completed, these groups came together and they realized what they did was they took, because here they had like people who suffered from their diseases and who were very willing to volunteer, and they basically analyzed their genomes, and they did this, so they had several thousand, and people who had, all these various autoimmune, and not just autoimmune, that's what was so amazing, skin diseases, because for a long time, alopecia areata was thought to be, because you see a dermatologist, it was thought to be a skin disease, which puts it in the same thing like psoriasis, a lot of diseases. That was the most. So they took from people all different diseases, genes, and then they analyzed to see what were the common, what they were finding. And the amazing thing about it was that they found that it did not have anything, the genes that they found that were important did not have anything in common, the people with alopecia areata, with the people with the skin diseases. It was the autoimmune diseases, which a lot of times don't look anything like alopecia areata, like, rheumatoid arthritis. And as I said in my article, I was actually at a scientific conference just because back then in like 2005 where they put up the preliminary results, and I literally almost fell off my seat because I had the list of the diseases that they found common genetics for, common genes. And up there were several that ran totally in my family, such as Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which is basically an autoimmune disease that my mother had, where she always had to take Synthroid because her thyroid, it's basically the immune system attacked her thyroid. Well, I never thought that had anything to do with my hair falling out. My grandfather had type 1 diabetes, which again, but those were some of the diseases I saw set up there. And so all of a sudden I realized there was a genetic link. And basically, once they found that, they were able to work with these other groups, and it made it, and basically that's how it made it a lot easier. They did studies in animals, and once they found out the genes, they could do these studies in mice where basically they turn on and off those genes so they could see what worked. And that's kind of how it led to where we are now, which hopefully we're pretty close to finding if not a cure, a good treatment for it.
And this is a big deal. I want to make sure people are aware of what we're talking about here, because for the longest time, I think you mentioned the treatment was an injection of corticosteroids. You either take them orally or they stick a needle in your head, scalp. In your scalp, and
it's very painful.
Okay, so the problem with that is that suppresses your entire immune system. So that's not good if you're trying to not get sick. Right. Or you could put on a wig. I think those are really the only two options. Right. But now that you sort of understand the underlying genetics, you could start looking for treatments. And you have a pretty good section in here discussing other FDA approved drugs that are designed to tackle other conditions that may work in this case. So talk a little bit about that.
Right. Well, that was one of the things that came out of this, the genome program, the fact that now instead of alopecia areata just kind of being off there with those weird, strange diseases, looking for how are we going to look for treatment? Nothing seems to work. Basically, they aligned with the treatments that were already with these other diseases that had some treatment. So it made it, and the biggest one was rheumatoid arthritis, which had been, which had some drugs already approved, and they started doing tests with first mice and then clinical trials, basically using these. Over the last 5 years, that's what's been going on. There's one called baricitinib. I don't know if I pronounced it right, but basically they did these ones. They're not, like, I can't take them because they're not, I don't have rheumatoid arthritis. I could take it, so my doctor won't approve it, but they've done clinical trials that have shown that it's very effective for alopecia areata, and they're in basically, and there's a few of these drugs. In fact, there's these clinical trials have been going on, and as you and I know, the FDA takes a long time, really long time, but we're very hopeful because we're now at the end of phase 3 trials, and back in March 2021, one of the drugs received what's called breakthrough therapy designation, that it showed it worked after these phase 3 trials, and we're hoping to get FDA approval by the end of the year, which will be the first actual treatment that, it's shown great promise. And the other thing I want to mention, Cameron, which I sort of forgot at the beginning, is that this affects people of all ages, including children. And I won't say unusual, I didn't get it till I was a fully grown adult, but there's lots and lots of children who get it, which is, it's hard enough to face these things when you're an adult, but when you're a child, having to explain why you're bald, it's just really hard. And the other really hard thing about this is when somebody sees somebody who's bald, they're automatically assumed to have cancer. And, though, I'm very glad that I don't have cancer, and alopecia is not a life-threatening disease. It does affect your mental health, because when people think you have cancer, there's just all sorts of ways you're treated. I mean, I've heard of people that, in their job, their managers didn't want to give them hard, position.
Oh, wow.
There's just a lot of things about it. And because cancer is such a dreaded disease, it's very difficult, but particularly for children. I just wanted to mention that because most people don't know that,
Yeah, well, let's get real here, because everyone cares about their physical appearance. Everybody cares to some extent what people around them think about them. This is just a human tendency, right? I mean, we're social animals. So that is important. And I don't want to downplay the significance of this, because, the way you're treated by other people, as you said, that can have a profound impact on your mental health. So this is really important progress. Now, I'm wondering if you could clear up some confusion for me. So my understanding is that doctors can prescribe medications off-label. That's always been, the way I understand it, a right that physicians have. They can treat their patients with whatever they want. So is there some kind of regulatory roadblock in the way, or are doctors just hesitant to prescribe this until they get better data?
Yeah, I think there really isn't any regulatory roadblock. And I think there are some people who maybe have been getting it. I know my doctor said she didn't want to take the chance, since before it had FDA approval. So they're just hesitant. I mean, and there are people, I'm sure, who've gotten it, and because you can do off-label. And there's some other drugs that I've known people have taken that were not approved for, which have like mixed results, that I know people sometimes have had good results with, who basically beg their doctors to prescribe because they heard about it. So that's more what it is. It's just not, until it's FDA approved, a lot of doctors, for good reason, don't want to, if something went wrong, they don't want to take if by some chance you had some adverse reaction, they don't want to take the chance of being liable. So I do understand it. And, since alopecia areata is not, it's not life threatening. So, doctors maybe won't, treat it the same way, which I totally understand. But it's just, anyway, it is an exciting time. I'm very hopeful that that this actually gets approved.
We shall see. There's really no way to predict what an agency like the FDA will do, especially after the last 2 years that we've been through. You just don't know what's going to happen. But I think overall, this is a great story in that it illustrates how good science is done. And I know you write about this a lot. All of us at ACSH write a lot about bad science and how poor studies are conducted and how they proliferate and they become sort of part of the accepted dogma, even though they're just the data that they provide is horrible. But I think in this case, you start with the problem, and as you acquire more evidence, you update your understanding, and then that reflects the treatments that you're trying to develop or that you're researching. So overall, I think this is great. I mean, I think you provided a great science lesson. So if people wanted to get more of this kind of content from you, where do they go? Are you on Twitter? Are you on any social media? Tell us what you're working on.
Well, basically, I'm on the AC. I am on LinkedIn. I don't do much social media, even though people have kind of urging me to. But I'm basically, I'm on LinkedIn where I try to put all my latest things that I'm working on up there. And then I'm working on, for whenever I have a new idea, I contact ACSH and ask them if they think people would be interested in it. This was a little different, this alopecia story, because as you said, Cameron, I'm really an environmental toxicologist. I deal with environmental chemicals. This is nothing, alopecia areata. This is more of a personal story for me. That's why I went to it. But then when I started writing, thinking about it, I was like, I really don't want to write about the emotional trauma I went through or any of that. That's in the past. And you can get that. You can look that up. But you can read lots of stories of people, if you're so inclined, of what they went through when they lost all their hair. But I thought, I haven't heard one story about the science of it. And so that was and I mulled it over for a few days, actually, mainly because it's not something because I said it was more of a personal thing. And then I didn't see anybody else writing, and I sat down and I wrote this in a day, which is a lot less than it normally takes, because I knew most of this in my head. I had to get a little updated on what was going on with the FDA and the regulatory stuff, because how slow they are. But the rest of it I pretty much knew, and I sent it in. So it's a little different than my usual. But I really appreciate your running this podcast and talking to me, Cameron.
Hey, it's my pleasure. And these are the kind of conversations I think more people need to have and need to listen to. So if you want to find out more about Susan's work and read she's got all kinds of articles on our website. So you just go to acsh.org. You can just punch her name into the search bar, and her profile is just acsh.org/Susan-Goldhaber-MPH. And of course, we share all her content on Twitter. But Susan, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll have to have you back at some point.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for having me.
All right. All right. Well, we'll see you guys in a little bit. We'll be back with our next segment. Sit tight. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the show. I am now joined by my usual co-host and intrepid colleague, Dr. Chuck Dinnerstein. Chuck, what's going on? How are you?
It's a beautiful day. It's spring for sure now in Long Island. And in midweek, one day after the terrorism in the subway, I got to spend the day in New York, and it was like pre-pandemic New York for me. It was really, really a nice day. So I'm a pretty happy guy.
That's incredible, man. I've never been to New York, but from what I understand from you guys, of course, because you're all over there, you're just resilient people, even even when something tragic like this happens, you're like, well, we have a life to live. We're getting on with our business here. So
I admire. I went in the subway the next day, and while there were definitely police there that hadn't been there before with automatic weapons, the people in the subway were, as usual, completely doing their own thing. It was like nothing had actually happened.
Right. He's got an M16. I have a crossword puzzle to complete. So don't talk to me.
Yeah, exactly. We all have our things to do.
All right. Well, with that out of the way, we've got two stories we're talking about this week. Chuck is the author of one, and I am the author of the other. But first up, we're talking about the relationship between health outcomes and fiber intake, Chuck. And you're I don't know if you're tipping over a sacred cow here, but you're saying that the cow is a little more complex than perhaps we first understood. So tell us about the study you're reporting.
Well, I was attracted to it from a contrarian point of view because it was arguing that fiber was not anywhere near as important as they thought. So that pulled me to the article, and then I took it from there. And basically, they did a another in a series of studies using a food survey, but I didn't really get too crazy about it because all the work that's been done on fiber and how it's helpful in cardiovascular disease has really been based on food surveys. So this was still in the same genre, but came to a different conclusion. And what they found was that they separated out the fibers into fibers from vegetables or fruits or cereals, and they found that the entire effect of fiber on beneficial cardiovascular outcomes came from cereal, which right away was different than things that had been said before and help explain away some of the variability that has been seen in the past when people have reported out nutritional studies and just lumped all the fibers together. What I thought that really showed was that the beauty and the limitations of reductionism in science. And the beauty of it was that now we can really focus from a health point of view on cereal fiber if you're serious about dealing with your cardiovascular disease. On the other hand, it shows you the limitation that it really may not be the cereal fiber at all. It may be one of the fellow travelers that go along with it in terms of healthy lifestyle or eating more fruits and vegetables or something else. So I thought that was an interesting thing to find. The other nice piece, there was two other nice pieces in the study that I liked. One was the use of the forest plots, which I think are very useful in the general public looking at these data sets. And basically a forest plot shows you on the vertical line the point of equipoise where there's no difference between treatment and outcome. And the horizontal lines show the variable of interest and its confidence limits. And as long as that horizontal line crosses the vertical line, the variable has no meaning. And it saves a lot of time because you don't have to read all of the English verbiage they use to hem and haw around the data. And when you look at the data that way, you see that fiber in general had very few effects on inflammatory markers, and the only one that had any effect at all was cereal. So it's very easy to get right at the value of it. The other interesting thing in the study is, again, one of these statistical approaches of mediation analysis, which I'm beginning to see more and more in the medical literature. And what mediation analysis tries to figure out, and probably we're going to have to write an article for the website to describe it a little bit more, is what percentage of impact of an event is it attributable to this particular variable? And when they looked at the effect of fiber on cardiovascular disease through the inflammatory markers, they found that inflammation, which has always been the major reason given by researchers for why fiber makes a difference, only accounted for about 20% of the impact of cereal on the outcome. And the rest of the effect of cereal was either related to the fiber itself directly being substituted for a bad food, or something about the people that were eating that fiber that made a difference. But it was very little of it was due to inflammation, which has always been the standard argument that people have made when they try to connect the dots together.
So there's so many questions that arise out of this for me, and they all center around how we properly interpret this, because I think it's really easy to look at a study and pull the wrong conclusion out of it, especially if it leans one way or the other, and you find one conclusion more favorable than the other. But this stuck out to me from your story. So you said those with the lowest fiber intake did not have a greater incidence of diabetes, heart failure, LDL cholesterol, or fasting glucose elevation.
Right.
So what I get from that is this. It doesn't make a difference. Can I quit eating my Special K in the morning because it's gross and it doesn't have any seeming benefit? Is that a fair conclusion to take away from this, or am I exaggerating?
It's certainly a fair conclusion that there's no evidence that fiber is affecting any of your metabolic byproducts. We don't see it. You don't see it in the fasting glucose. You don't see it in the cholesterol, and you rarely see it in some of these other inflammatory biomarkers. So there's no great scientific linkage between fiber directly and making your arteries healthier or preventing diabetes. Now, the package that the fiber comes in, which is the lifestyle of people that decide that they really want to munch on wood, probably has a bigger effect.
Okay, so as we wrap this up, is there any medical reason to think that one source of fiber is better than the other? Because I've heard it's really interesting what people will fight about on the internet, because you can find people who are very, very passionate about where they get their fiber from, and I've heard arguments go both ways. So I'm wondering, does it make sense that you should say, okay, well, let's focus on cereal fiber, because if there is a benefit, it's going to be here? Does that actually make sense?
No. No. If you want to have that fight on Twitter and on social media, then you can pull this article and you can pull the original research and say, yes, it has to be cereal. But if you're living in the real world and you're eating in a free living situation, as they describe it, then we're back to the old standard of eat a wide ranging diet and eat moderately.
Same old boring medical advice that we always have to give people, but it just seems to generally be the case, right?
It is the case. Our mothers taught us it was the case. Mother knew best in this particular instance. And, we have not been able to improve upon that in the most general of ways. Now, you may want to sit down and get a personalized evaluation by a nutritionist, but I don't think that the recommendations are going to be significantly different.
All right. Well, there you have it. So maybe take it with a grain of salt, just because of the self-reported data. But this seems to be a reasonable challenge to the accepted wisdom in an important area of nutrition. So we'll leave that there, Chuck, and let's talk about everyone's favorite subject, which of course is genetically engineered crops, and more specifically, the fighting over it, and it's not unique to this subject, but you often see, the scientific consensus, if you will, all the research points in one direction, but as you just sort of alluded to, on Twitter, on Facebook, on whatever website, there will be a knockdown, drag out fight over this. And one side is a shill for Monsanto, and the other side is, organic food munching hippies, and it's a real war. But this new study came out very recently in the journal GM Crops and Food, and they looked at these discussions that are happening online. And the takeaway that I got out of this paper is that this debate over GMOs seems to be running out of steam. And the primary reason is they two data points that I think support this conclusion. The first is that people are talking about this way less on Twitter, which is the data they looked at. There's been a significant decline. It looks like an 82% decline, and they just took all of the tweets. They just did a search for all of the relevant discussions that are going on. So basically, very few people are seriously talking about GMOs today like they were in 2015. And this is something I really wouldn't have predicted, is the media is actually covering this topic more, and they're doing so in a more favorable light. And I thought that was an interesting result. But I think the basic thing that we can start talking about is these doomsday predictions that came from the anti-GMO side, if you want to call them that. They said that there's all sorts of health risks. We don't know what this is going to do in the environment. This could be a disaster, blah, blah, blah. You had all these documentaries and terrible books coming out. But I think that once the disaster never comes, people just get fatigued with your scary stories and they just stop caring. That's my analysis of what's going on. What do you see here from your vantage point?
Well, I think that you're partially correct about that fear fatigue. We're seeing fear fatigue now with COVID and all the things going on with that. And to be honest, COVID overwhelmed everyone's attention for the last 2 years. We haven't heard a lot about anybody starving anywhere for some time, with the exception of people that are in lockdown now in Shanghai. So I think that our attention has been massively diverted elsewhere. I think the other thing that makes it a big difference is that CRISPR is here now. And CRISPR has changed a lot of the conversation because we're no longer talking about putting a fish gene in a tomato. We're talking about making one or two simple nucleotide substitutions, which seems a lot closer to natural cultivation and breeding than popping that fish gene in. So I think that makes a significant difference. The other part, at least with respect to fear, is that I think that using the words Monsanto and Bayer do not have that same shock effect that they did a few years ago. You cannot run on the gist, the emotional response to Monsanto forever. You got to back it up with something. So you're right. Without the dire warnings coming true, all you're left is with the sound and the fury.
I'm glad you brought up the Monsanto angle, because I think what you see today and what they reported in this study is that there were, in this downward trend we're describing, there were increases. At certain points they say the data was very messy. There was this kind of undulation going on month to month, and of course that's because of these lawsuits against Monsanto and now Bayer alleging that glyphosate causes cancer. But it's interesting. I mean, some of these cases did not go, I guess all three that went to trial did not go in Bayer's favor. This draws a lot of attention. I think some of these activist groups do it intentionally. They sort of pattern the work that they do after movies like Aaron Brockovich or The Insider, right? And they try to bring this narrative to life where you have these rebel attorneys and these committed activists, and they're not going to back down. They're going to fight the man till the last breath, kind of a thing. So I think that sort of a narrative resonates with most of us. Everybody loves an underdog story. But then, of course, the media wants to cover it. And so I think that is keeping this on life support. That's what I said in the article. So the controversy is still alive, but it just can't last. And this is sort of I don't know, maybe it's like slamming an energy drink when what you really need to do is go to sleep. It's that kind of a phenomenon. Is that what you're seeing?
Well, I think that's I think that's true. I think that's part of it. And you get near the end of your article, you start bringing in the social justice campaign around this. And I was thinking about it, and I did find this quote about it, which is, the first essential component of social justice is adequate food for all mankind. And that was said by Norman Borlaug. That wasn't said by a corporate interest. That certainly wasn't said by many of the activist groups. This was by the guy that set off the Green Revolution. So I think that they're making use of the social justice term, but they're failing to recognize that social justice is actually on both sides of the political aisle, and that it's true. I think that it's very difficult for someone that's hungry to see much beyond that, and that our high-income country attempt to bring our resources to low and middle income countries to help them with hunger is being politically misinterpreted.
It's a very good point. And this is, I don't know why this resonates with me, but this is an issue I'm really passionate about. And what I see from a lot of these activist groups who kind of have glommed onto this social justice ideology or movement, whatever you want to call it, there's real consequences here, and the war in Ukraine has sort of exacerbated this, because you see what happens when all of a sudden there's too little food and too many people, people are really at risk when you deny them access to technology. So I really resent that. And the fact that they do it in the name of, we're fighting this new form of neocolonialism, it's just outrageous to me. And what they address in the study, and this is why I thought of that social justice aspect of this, is that countries that get access to biotech seeds, say like an insect resistant cotton or something like that, they see the results. The farmers see their yields go up, and you have the media in the country seeing the results, and they go, oh, well, this isn't so bad after all. Maybe we don't have to be afraid of Monsanto. We don't have to love them and worship them and, be subservient to them, but we can be customers and buy their products, and everybody benefits. So that was always an interesting aspect of this. And we've reported on this before, but basically what happens is when farmers get access to improved seed varieties or new pesticides or better fertilizers, what have you, they go, oh, we need to use this. This is why people want this, So I think I guess all I'm saying is like reality slaps people in the face at some point. And I think that's part of the reason we're running out of steam in this argument, is just not only is nothing bad happening, but good things are happening. So I guess overall, this is encouraging. The results in this paper are very positive development. Awesome stuff. Awesome stuff. We're getting more succinct as we go along. And I think that benefits everybody. Chuck and I get to start our weekend, and the rest of you get a nice, sharp, short science lesson. So if you want to get the articles that we are talking about on this podcast, you just go to our website, acsh.org, punch in your email address. You will get our dispatch emails when we send them out. Follow us on Twitter as well, ACSH.org. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you next time.